Coming up on this episode of FAS TV, we visit the farm producing 250,000 Christmas trees. We hear the benefits to livestock of Herbal Leys and how deferred hill grazing can significantly reduce input costs. Farm diversification now plays a crucial role in sustaining farm profitability. New entrant farmer Cameron Smith and his family run the Kilted Farming Company, a 1,000-acre arable enterprise near Kinross growing barley, wheat, oilseed rape, and they rent land for potatoes and peas. 16 years ago, the family diversified into Christmas trees, and they now grow around 250,000 trees for wholesale and retail distribution across the UK.
We grow, maintain and wholesale and retail all our trees ourselves, so we kind of do the full package. That includes maintenance for the trees all year round, harvesting the trees, and then we dispatch the trees from our base here in Kinross.
Growing and maintaining Christmas trees is very similar to traditional cereal crops and comes with similar challenges.
We start in March planting, so we buy seedlings. These are usually about a year old, and we plant them into arable ground, mainly because they do need a good nutrient, a good field, but also for the harvesting aspect and the maintenance, we need to be able to access that field. So good arable fields is quite important. So we plant that in March, mechanically planted, so we can plant to kind of 5,000 trees a day, no problem. That happens through March, April, and then these trees are really left for 1 to 2 years to get their roots in. They tend to grow down before they grow up, so for 2 years their roots will just spread out and they'll get a base. In the third year we'll go in and start maintenance, which will include pruning, so just creating that shape of the tree, which is actually quite important. Christmas trees naturally want to grow up, but they can quite often grow out and be very bushy, so we need to prune them every year. We then also do base pruning, so that's pruning around the bottom of the tree to give it a clean handle, so that it's when it comes to the harvest, you have that stump at the bottom to put in your stand. Other tasks through the year, similar to arable crop, we've got disease and we've got weeds and we've got pests, so we do a herbicide spray at the start of the year to try and control weeds. Things like thistles and cleavers, we don't want them climbing up through the trees, because then when it gets harvested we've got a lot of mess in the trees, so we do a glyphosate spray at the start of the year. We then apply a fertiliser, granular fertiliser, that can be hand applicated, a handful every tree, so that's quite labour intensive, so that's a big part through the year. And then third bit would be pest control, so not only deer and rabbits, which is controlled by shooting and stock fencing. One of the biggest issues in Christmas trees is aphid control, so that is a big issue, so we do a regular spray of aphids, probably 3 times a year to try and control the aphid. If aphids get bad in trees, they can just wipe out a crop. They cause the tree to be stressed, loses all its needles, and it's just unsaleable. So aphid control is a big part of it. So that happens through the summer to about end of July. Once we get to end of July, we start looking at marking. So that's when we would go through the crop and size grade and quality grade the trees. So that happens, a visual thing. We do that, and then we would attach a label onto that tree as to if it's a first or a second and what size it is. So for example, we've got 4 foots as a pink label, 5 foots an orange, 6 as a blue and 7 as a yellow label. And then that means we can not only count what we're going to harvest that year or what's available, but we can also make it easy for the harvesters to say, go out and cut all the blue labels, and they know that's all the 6 foots. So that happens through the end of the year, July, August. September's a little bit quieter, you're kind of prepping for Christmas, finishing up marking, and then we tend to start harvesting about start of November. The general rule of thumb is you don't start cutting until you've had a frost. Frost slows the tree down, stops it growing. So once that frost's happened, we know we can go in and cut the trees and not worry about needle loss or the trees dying off. So this year we started cutting on the 8th of November. We then cut the trees mechanically with a lobster claw bit of equipment that is motorised and just drives around the field, cuts the trees. We then leave the trees to lie for 3 to 5 days. That lets the heat come out of the tree and it stops it sweating in the net and when it gets palletised. Once it's lain for about 5 days, we then drag these trees into the roads. We've got the blocks and we drag out into the roads, and then the palletising machine comes along. The guys load these into a palletiser and nets and can palletise kind of 50 to 80 trees in a pallet, which is how you get the bulk out the field. These pallets are then brought back here to our main yard and loaded onto lorries and shipped all over the UK. January, we go back in the field, tidy up anything that's been missed or left, and February is usually our month off, and then we're back to planting again in March. So it happens constant. Obviously we plant different years, so we've got field 1 is 5 years old, field 2 is 4 years old, so we get different heights of trees in different fields and different ages, but there isn't a standard size in that field. There's a big mix, so we do have a big mix through a single field. The tree fields have all got enough stock in them that we've not finished a field yet. Our oldest field's 12 years old and we're still getting trees out of it. We'd like to think by 15 years it'll be emptied. What we would then do with that field is probably leave it, finish the harvest in November, December, leave it for a year to help stumps and roots break down, and then go in with a heavy mulcher, a surface mulcher, which will take away the stumps. Spruce and Christmas trees tend to grow more level, so the roots don't take as long to break down as maybe your kind of commercial woodland. So you go in with that mulcher, chew it up, and then maybe subsoil. You could then plough it again and replant. The full field replant is a lot simpler. It maybe takes longer. You can spot plant, whereas you take a tree out, you plant a new one, but that gives you different ages in the field and different management, so it's a little bit more difficult. We will rotate within the tree fields. We've got 5 different fields, and that'll provide us the appropriate size that we need for our harvest and our needs.
Christmas trees are very time and labour intensive, which places significant pressure on the business throughout the year.
Labour, getting labour, sourcing labour and keeping labour. You have a lot of people telling you they want work, but after a week or 2 weeks they're away. Not going to lie, it's a hard shift. It's quite repetitive, kind of like the berry picking or the veg picking. A lot of these people that did these jobs were foreign, and we're finding a lot of these foreigners have gone home. We used to run a full Romanian team of 15 guys, and thankfully this year I've got a good team, all Scottish boys though, so there is a change that has happened. So labour is probably my biggest worry, threat, and then other things, maybe pest control, aphid control, and the kind of dwindling supply of chemicals that we're allowed to use to keep aphids under control is slightly worrying, but we're trying to get new ways, trying to increase biodiversity, which helps these things.
Cameron is an ambitious young farmer and has his sights firmly set on one special prize.
I would like to win the best tree, and there's a competition, like everything, there's a competition for the best tree, and the winner gets to donate the tree to Downing Street. That would be a nice thing to have on the wall. Apart from that, we're just trying to build the retail site here, and we love people coming in and choosing their own tree, and they get to see it, we take out the net, so we're just trying to build the site here, get that going as much as possible. New entrants, yeah, young farmers, there's plenty of them about, and there's loads of great opportunities, especially through young farmers, SAYFC, loads of great things to get involved if you're not necessarily directly from a farm. I wasn't brought up on a farm, I got into it, so it can happen. If you're keen for it, go for it and get involved.
In the southwest of Scotland, David Whiteford farms at Maxwellston Farm near Girvan in Ayrshire. He runs 220 spring calving suckler cows and 1,100 ewes. David's sheep enterprise encompasses 800 Aberfield and 300 Blackface ewes, and for the past 2 to 3 years he's been working with Sailor cows, breeding Sailor heifers and bulling them with a Charolais. David has introduced Herbal Leys to the farm, which has improved his calving percentage and overall livestock performance.
We wanted to go to a grass-based system just because as soon as the grass starts growing in the spring, that's when the face lights up and it gets you out of bed in the morning. Our grazing period's probably extended 3 or 4 months. Build a huge bank of grass in the back end to keep the cattle out longer and the sheep going in grass longer. We've cut our feeding away back because we're lambing outdoors, and as soon as the grass starts to grow we put the sheep into rotation in April and everything just keeps moving all summer. We've been growing a lot of forage crops and for outwintering sheep, cattle, and we decided after these forage crops to put in Herbal Leys to try it. That was 2.5 years ago. Probably what drove us to the Herbal Leys was the reduced nitrogen, huge growth potential, and rotational grazing it. We're getting the best out of the herbals. Hopefully they'll last the test of time. Probably about 60 acres of Herbal Leys in now, and there'll be more going in next year after the kale and after a crop of turnips. They've done tremendous this year due to the dry weather. Probably the only fields that were really growing in the really dry weather because it's quite a dry farm, and that was very little nitrogen. So we put on 100 bit of urea in February if we can get onto the ground, and that's it for the year. The pHs are probably in these fields are above 6, and the P's and K's were usually pretty high as well, just while having a lot of dung over the years. And so they've done really well. When we establish the crop, if it's been in kale or turnips, we'll work the ground, we'll leave the weeds come. We need to be patient in the spring. The Dawkins will come up. If it's usually quite dry in April, and we just have to be patient, let the weeds come, have the ground prepared, spray with Roundup, and then straight in with the grass seed at that point. Last year we done a field, we ploughed it and power harrowed it and land levelled it, and the other field we just subsoiled it and dished it and power harrowed it. And I think actually the one that wasn't ploughed, had a better crop, a bigger crop. It was after fodder beat actually. I think we had just with all the nutrients still in the top bit of the soil light, it seemed to it established really quickly and it done well. We don't give them any fertiliser at establishment. We don't want to make the roots hungry looking for fertiliser, so we just make sure the field P's and K's and everything's up to speed. And if a lot of dung is put on beforehand, or slurry, or just whatever's going at the time, we'll graze it off with sheep and then introduce cattle after that once the sward's a bit denser. If there is a weed problem, we'll let red shank or something, we'll just top it 2 or 3 times just to keep the weeds down. The best fields are probably in these Herbal Leys. So last year we had put the smalls of the stores out, like 24th of February I think it was. Just a small number to begin with and then gradually increase the numbers. Generally these fields are set up in a paddock system and then just eat it and keep moving them on. Stock performed really well throughout the year. Generally we've made a lot of changes to the farm over the past maybe 5 or 6 years. I wouldn't say we've been measuring, but you can just tell by the eye, I think, just how stock are performing. We do a lot of testing for worms, and we very rarely have to worm through the grazing period for the lambs. Like, always going on to fresh meat and going by the eye. Stock always looks as if it's performing. with 75 cows and calves and 2 bulls running some of the paddocks during the summer, and the calves have come in tremendous this year.
David has also seen an improvement in his calving percentage since introducing Herbal Leys. However, the management of the Herbal Leys can prove challenging.
Probably one of the biggest challenges is keeping on top of the Herbal Ley in peak season when it's really growing. You don't want it to get too strong, but also you don't want to eat it down too far, because that chicken and plantain, eat it down too far and the water goes into the root, it seemingly kills it off. Like, so you need to just manage it completely different from like a set stocking scenario. It's just you need to really treat it like a baby, to be fair, so it lasts the test of time. If you haven't tried them before, I would make sure you speak to an agronomist and just see what you want out of that Herbal Ley. You know, is it for cattle, is it for sheep, or is it, we still can tweak what else is in it, if you want a longer grazing or a short grazing, or if you want to make silage. It needs to be designed for your specific farm.
Depending on the type of land available on your farm, deferred grazing may be an option. At Maxwellston, there's over 550 hectares of hill ground. David has changed their system to introduce deferred hill grazing of cattle to reduce input costs whilst maintaining output performance.
We introduced deferred grazing to our system 2 years ago. Even if my grandfather was here, he had blue-grey cows out in the hill, and they were out in the hill all year. But the sheep were still running in the hill at that point. We've took the sheep off, reduced the sheep numbers a little, and brought the sheep off the hill during the summer, trialling this the last 2 years, and leaving the hill grow out, and then putting the cattle to the hill in the winter instead of keeping them in the sheds on slats. It's a system that we're still trialling at the moment. We used to calve spring and back end. We've slipped the back end cows over the past 2 years round to spring. We want the really good, fit, healthy, young cows to go into this deferred grazing. I was astonished when we took the stock off the hill for 4 or 5 months how much the hill grew. So we'll put the cattle up there after spanning and scanning and rotational graze the cows round the hill on paddocks that we've got set up. We are probably growing half the amount of silage now that we used to. So our labour, our costs, everything has just got less and less the last couple of years. We're still growing silage, but hopefully we can get to a stage where we've grown very little silage. If we can rotational graze these cows in paddocks right into February, March, and start calving at the end of March, it's a real win-win, especially if we're using the Celea breed now. They're just that bit hardier, more fat cover, hairier cow that's suited more to the outdoors. We're calving the heifers at 2 years of age now, so if those cows are still maturing at spending time, if they're not big enough or if they're a bit leaner, we'll keep them down. The best ones, we'll keep them separate. We can shed the cows after the calves are spent, and we'll keep them separate, the leaner ones separate on the hill, and we'll bring them in separately. There's better bits in the hill and worse bits in the hill, and the paddock sizes probably vary. There's one paddock 368 acres, there's another one's kind of 50 acres, there's another couple of 100 acres, and it's a very loose situation at the moment. I'd really like to try no fence collars, maybe going into next year, but it's going to be a huge investment.
David brings the cows inside for calving before they eventually go out onto a paddock rotation.
These cows up in the hill, they're outside. You get spells of weather that are good, spells of weather that are bad, but they're generally content. Very few feet problems when they're at the hill. The cattle just look quite happy. We used to run a lot of black-faced ewes at the hill. It was a very hard system to manage with reduced staff that we have now. So this system, the sheep are down in the better ground, which I think they perform better, and the cows are up in the higher ground, and I think they perform better because they're not lying in slats all winter. You've not got the feet problems or the tramp tails or other health problems that you get with cattle indoors. Now that we're deferred grazing and went away from back end calving, once we've spent the spring calves, put them back out onto some of the drier fields with the creep feed and keep them out October and November. And they're still out at the moment. It's just the end of November. They're just ready to come in. These calves, really healthy. They've been vaccinated, jagged a few with pneumonia, but nothing to the extent we used to have to jag.
David has some advice for farmers considering deferred grazing.
You need the right cow for this system. Small, hairy cow, it's ideal. That's going to stand the test of time up there. You need to let the hill grow though. You can't have sheep up there during the summer or cows up there during the summer. We used to have the back end cows out there for a while and then bring them in and calve them, but we'd just try and leave the hill as is and put the sheep that were on the hill onto the silage fields. So we're making less silage. The sheep are performing better because they're on better meat, and we're not making as much silage, so our costs have really been down over the last couple of years. Also a big factor in reducing our labour and our feed costs, our winter costs was just spiralling out of control. And going forward, fertiliser prices, this system going into next year when we'll be really into it, we'll probably make a quarter of the silage we used to if it works. It's a system, hopefully, that will keep us farming for years to come, and hopefully less labour and a bit more time to ourselves.
We're heading towards Christmas and there's definitely a chill in the air, but the temperatures have been varying, and so these fluctuating temperatures is a stressful event for calves. In addition to that, any other stresses such as management changes, diet changes, weaning, castration, dehorning, any of these stressors altogether can make outbreaks of pneumonia more common. They basically let the bugs that are normally in calves, not causing any problem, have the opportunity to take hold. So we have been getting lots of samples, nasopharyngeal swabs, blood samples, tissue samples and carcasses in for post-mortem examination to try and diagnose the bugs involved in the outbreaks of pneumonia, to help inform treatment decisions and to help inform vaccination protocols. We've been seeing lots of diagnoses of viral pneumonia such as RSV and PI3, and bacteria such as Mycoplasma bovis and Pasteurella species. One bacterial pathogen that we're particularly interested in this year is one called Histophilus somni. So that's a bacteria that is involved with pneumonia in cattle, but in certain circumstances it can cause a septicemia. So it gets into the blood, it travels around the body, and it can settle out, causing lesions, causing damage to the heart, sometimes to the muscles of the throat, and sometimes it can cause a meningitis, so infection in the brain. We don't really know why this happens, but the types of units we tend to see this in are beef suckler units in finishing cattle inside. And so we're taking a particular interest this year because we have been diagnosing more of it over the last 10 years. Our tests for diagnosing it have improved, but we think there is also a genuine increase in the number of cases that we're seeing. So we'll be following up any cases that we see in the coming months and trying to see if there are any common management factors that make this condition more common on some units than on others. In recent weeks, we've also been getting samples from some herds that have had poor scanning rates, so high numbers of barren cows at PD sessions. Very often it's presumed that this is due to a bull not working, but please do bear in mind that that might not be the only reason. We do diagnose cases of venereal transmission of a bacteria called Campylobacter foetus, and this can cause the same issue, high barren rates, early embryonic loss and abortions. So if you have a bull that's introduced to a group of cows that's infected, he can pass that infection on to the females. They either won't conceive or will have an early embryonic loss. But if you then introduce another bull, then the females can pass the infection onto the new bull. So you can see it's a vicious cycle unless you get on top of the issue. So if you do have high barren rates, do discuss with your vet how best to investigate this. Unfortunately, diagnosis and management of this condition are quite tricky, but your vet is best placed to advise you. Sheep are also being scanned at this time of year, and it's an ideal opportunity if you identify barren ewes that are very thin. It's an ideal opportunity to check for the iceberg diseases. So these are the diseases that you might only be aware of 1 or 2 instances in your flock, but they might represent a much bigger problem. So these are conditions like OPA, which is an infectious tumour of the lungs, or Johne's disease that causes a thickening in the guts, Maidie-Visna, CLA. So thin sheep are more likely to be carrying these diseases, so getting these ewes examined by post-mortem examination is a really good way to screen your flock to see if these conditions are present, and then consider what you can do to help manage that within your flock. Finally, you'll all be aware that there have been several diagnoses of highly pathogenic avian influenza across the country. This has been diagnosed in a small number of commercial units, but also in lots of wild birds that have had post-mortem examinations done across Scotland. This is a notifiable disease, so if you suspect the condition in your own birds, it's vital that you contact APHA, so that's the Animal Plant and Health Agency, immediately. All keepers of birds have got to house their birds just now, and that's to reduce the likelihood of transmission. There's great information on the Scottish Government website about the latest outbreaks, where the control zones are, and also information on what to do if you find a dead bird, so please do follow that advice. Well, I hope you and your families have a great Christmas, a healthy, happy and safe Christmas, and a prosperous new year, and thanks for tuning in.
Hello, I'm Raymond and welcome to the Rural Roundup. The Scottish Government has recently announced the opening of its Agri-Environment Climate Scheme, or AECS, for next year. This will be a fully funded round, opening on the 1st of January. The closing date is yet to be confirmed. The Scottish Suckler Beef Support Scheme deadline is the 31st of December. Please remember that all eligible producers with 3/4 bred beef cattle must submit the application form by this date. The SACGS grant scheme closes for claims on the 31st of December. Please remember to submit your claim form along with your invoices and proof of payment by that date. Finally, the Scottish Farm Business Survey is beginning its annual round of recruitment. Participation in this scheme is voluntary and 100% confidential. What we need from you is your most recent set of annual accounts and up to 2 hours of your time for a follow-up discussion. In return from this, you will get a farm business report, a whole farm carbon audit, and an individual benchmarking report for each of your individual enterprises. If you're interested in taking part in this scheme, please contact Sasha Grierson. Stay tuned for more from FAS TV and the Farm Advisory Service, and we'll see you back next year. Have a great Christmas.
And that's all from FAS TV for 2021. We're taking a break over Christmas and New Year, but we'll be back with another episode of FAS TV on the 21st of January.